Thank you, Simeon. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome back from lunch. It's a little challenging to get into the tech-heavy stuff after lunch, but we'll get going. I'll take the liberty to, again, start off with a question. So feel free to be put on the spot or be uncomfortable. I want to ask, in your opinion or in your own words, what is a Mojaloop platform? What comes to mind when you hear a Mojaloop platform? Mojaloop platform.
Transaction switching.
So you mean the platform enables transaction switching? Thank you. I'm looking for 5 answers, and then we get good. Neil, please.
The Rails.
The Rails. The Rails. Thank you. Sorry. The Rails. Yes, please. What comes to mind when you think of Mojaloop platform?
Instant payment, open source transaction switching.
Instant payment, open source transaction switching. 2 more. I'm ready to make you uncomfortable. So, okay, Elijah.
Mojaloop platform. So the Mojaloop platform, I think about it, it makes me think about an instant payment system, a national instant payment system.
Yes, please.
It's money transfer.
So Mojaloop platform means money transfer. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for all the 5 answers. Obviously, nothing is wrong, but for those of you who did the Mojaloop training program, we look at 3 things. I think there is slight nuance between, you can argue it's not slight, but there is slight difference between the 3 terms we talk about in the Mojaloop world. One is the platform, and then there is the hub, the Mojaloop hub. And then we have a scheme. When you hear those 3 words, maybe that gives more context and the differences between that. But as you can imagine, we'll focus on the Mojaloop platform side of things. My name is Sam Kumari. I'm a Mojaloop community contributor. I'm involved with the various governance groups, the DA, CCB, and supporting the release train management and technical delivery of some of the core work streams as well. A lot of people working and supporting the Mojaloop core, some people working on the next version of Mojaloop, we'll hear later in the day. Some of the contributors working on infrastructure support, and some of the contributors supporting financially. Thank you everyone. So today we'll take a brief look at where we are in Mojaloop, in the journey or evolution of Mojaloop. We'll cover the releases in detail. So essentially, when we talk about Mojaloop, what are we getting with that? Right now, the number is, we have a V15 release candidate, and we have a Mojaloop 14.1.1. So what does that mean? Then we'll close it off by looking at the roadmap and the future. So we keep talking about the PI 21 meetings. I know one of us, I think Kim talked about the PI, but a program increment is a time period, and right now we are in the PI 21, in the journey of Mojaloop. And at each phase we've been having focus areas, and they've been changing and evolving over time. I don't want to get into the detail on that. And then this is the work stream progress. So this is part of we have this pillar structure, the 3 pillars, and then there is a foundation, quality product. This work stream, the Mojaloop releases and maintenance, comes under the quality product. We wanted to do Mojaloop publish 14.1.0 in this PI, and then have IAC support for that, infrastructure as code support for that, and also other downstream teams like Miniloop and others who are taking Mojaloop core Helm charts. Wanted to develop a release candidate for V15 and publish it. And then we'll look at in the upcoming session, in this session later, where we are with that. We were able to accomplish most of that. We have a release candidate for V15, which we're hoping to publish as soon as possible. So we look at the OSS platform components. What when we talk about Mojaloop, this wanted to tie this into the initial question. When you hear about Mojaloop platform, what does it mean? What are the API, Mojaloop API versions that are current? What are the use cases that are supported? And corresponding to that, what are the resources? What is the backend functionality that's supported? What are the settlement models and how does the functionality look like on that side? And the third-party initiation support as well. Does Mojaloop support that? So there are some slides here. I don't want to go into detail on each of them, but for you, they are there for your reference. This will be on GitHub, and you can look at what's available and what are the versions of each. So the Mojaloop Core, I'll cover this slide briefly. The Mojaloop Core, I think some of you mentioned, something that supports instant payment, the clearing, settlement, the ledgers, the ALS, the coding. So this is the core side of things. Obviously, there are a lot of other things involved in the Mojaloop platform as well. We have the third-party related services, the Mojaloop connectors, which play the role of simulators for validation and testing. We have gateways for various security functions. For JWS, the JSON Web Signature, mutual TLS, firewalls, IP filtering. And then we have several supporting services as well. So we need the system for, I'm sure today we have, there's a cool story behind this, behind us getting this printout today. You can ask him what the story was. But if you see the central picture, this is the Mojaloop hub. There were three terms we discussed before: the hub, platform, and the scheme. On the hub side of things, you can see several connections. So this point, the third point, fourth point is about the interoperability, connecting with settlement banks, onboarding of FSPs, integrations with them, connection management for security, all those things. And then we have the Mojaloop toolkit, which we heard in detail in some of the previous sessions. Oracles for various types and identifiers supported. And the infrastructure side of things, what do we use? So what do we need? The Kubernetes infrastructure as code, Miniloop, Rancher, automated releases and deployments. And then finance portal, of course. We saw in some of the demos for bulk and others earlier today, even in the Rafiki session, we saw how the finance portal and the FSP UIs, user interfaces, can be used to track and view the status of transfers, and then monitoring support as well. These are the current versions of the Mojaloop APIs. The FX API is in design. Hopefully we'll get a standard version there soon. And then several of the use cases. PDP obviously lays the foundation for all the use cases, and then we have listed here, and there is a legend, what is supported now. Most of the use cases are supported now, but it's just that we don't have testing for those because they need equipment and support on the DFSP side. For example, if we talk about agent-initiated cash-in, we need something to simulate that side of things. Or if we talk about point-of-sale device, it's just that the FSPs need to use that, but the support is there, the rails are there. Similarly, for resources, this can be used as reference. I won't go into detail on this. The settlement functionality, the back office functionality, third-party functionality. A few seconds on this one, Mojaloop release process. There are some sessions earlier where Kim and the community talks about scaled agile framework. So Mojaloop is a scaled agile framework where we have different work streams, different work teams working on their own schedule, developing features, and submitting them for absorption into the whole of Mojaloop platform. So we see the cycle here following that, and this event this week is a big part of this cycle. So here we decide what comes into the roadmap, what is the priority. And then in workshops next week and later on, we refine these into more tangible goals, acceptance criteria, epics, stories, pipelines, and then the implementation and release cycle it kicks off. Again, this is for reference, but we want we talked a lot about contributions and having new contributors on board. So this is how you can get on board and be part of the process. So we have this big component diagram. Previously, we used to have these on the placement as well. This talks about the various components involved. The container management orchestration, the core components itself, and supporting components, what are the CI/CD aspects, the operational monitoring. We looked at this in a text form earlier as well, and some of the accelerators such as finance portal, the Mojaloop SDKs, and tools for quality assurance as well. Yeah. So you can see this on the backside. We have this component diagram for your reference. Thank you. And then this view gives which function all these different services provide: the discovery, the transfers, the agreement, bulk, QA, tooling. So this is our pillar structure, and Mojaloop, as we discussed, falls into the quality product side of things. Of course, everything is interrelated, but that's the focus. So we'll cover these 4 things as we discussed in the agenda. I want to go through quickly so that we can spend more time on demonstrations and questions later on. So if there is any question you have, if you want me to stop at a point and go into detail, please raise your hand or interrupt me. So we had Mojaloop 14.10 that was published right after the last community event, but we also had another release after that. We have 14.11 as well. It was mostly focused on enhanced functionality on the testing toolkit for importing and exporting rules. So these rules can define how we want the simulated switch to behave. If you want them to give an error scenario when a particular identifier is used, we can do that. So there is enhanced reporting functionality as well. So we can have reports. Let's say we run a test, and there is an endpoint now to access that report that lists the report, gives the history, and there are some enhancements as well. V15 release candidate. There are some of the aspects here that Miguel, colleague, will go into detail, but there are 2 things I want to cover here. So there was this a proof of concept done for remittances, where some of the fields in the FSP interoperability specification were used for implementing a remittance functionality. So that was done in this release candidate as well, the usage of sub-scenarios to specify remittance as an option. And then there were some enhancements done where test currencies were not supported in some of the services like ALS, so that was fixed as well. I won't go into detail on the bug fixes, but the list is here. As part of increased test coverage and improved access to other use cases such as bulk for adoption and remittances, we uncovered more areas that were that did not have coverage before. So in this PI, that was addressed. So there were some callbacks that were giving wrong information. So that was fixed. And here are some, you can also go to the release notes, which Miguel will do later on, to look at the exhaustive detail of all the changes included in the release. With that, I'll pass it on to Miguel, who's a principal architect, but he'll also introduce himself. Miguel, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Shall I share my screen?
Go ahead, please. Thank you.
Right. Hi, everyone. Let me just introduce myself very quickly. My name is Miguel de Barris. I'm a principal architect. I work at Infotex. I've been working on the open source funded project for Mojaloop for the last 4 years or more. And I'm heavily involved in the maintenance and development of the core services, as well as the DA and some of the other change control boards. Right. So let's just quickly go over, I think, at least the biggest changes that might impact you from version 15 release. So something we've been working towards over the last, I think, two PIs or even maybe 3 PIs, we've been working towards externalizing all the backend dependencies. So previously with version 14.10, we introduced the ability and the configuration that you can easily deploy an external backend, or you can use the ones that come packaged in it. With version 15, we've completely removed the infrastructure pieces. So by backend dependencies, I'm talking about MySQL, Kafka, Redis, Mongo, Zookeeper, etc. So they're no longer part of the Mojaloop Helm release themselves, right? However, we have provided an example backend Helm chart, right, that you can use for testing purposes, or dev, or even a demo POC deployment, etc. Right? So once again, this is not something you should be using for production. You should use this purely just for convenience and for testing. If you're doing production, you should be deploying your backends as separate deployments that is really best practices. So the next question is, why are we doing this? Well, back-end dependencies, and we didn't have any control over them. So whenever someone would make a change or basically it would impact us. So a lot of the time, our releases would be broken by these external dependencies that we have no control over. So we want to remove that coupling. We want to remove that. It allows us to improve our stability. It allows us to have a better or more manageable upgradability of our Mojaloop releases. It also reduces our maintenance. We also want to do this because, once again, it's aligned to best practices. We want to force people to actually deploy those backends separately. The next big ticket item, I would say, is the utilize externalized secrets for password management. And this kind of really synchronizes with the externalizing of backend dependency. So previously, we had clear text passwords in our configurations, and now we support both clear text and pre-configured Kubernetes secrets. However, it's worth mentioning that our pre-configured Kubernetes secrets, or if you set the Kubernetes secret, it will override any clear text password. So this always takes preference, the secrets, right? And really, what this is about is making sure that we align to best practices from a security perspective, because secrets can be encrypted. We can also manage those secrets through RBAC access, etc. And it also synergizes with what we've done before, right? We've externalized our backends. Those backends are generating secrets for us, and we can just reuse those, right? And it's also great because we can also now support secrets and key management systems such as HashiCorp Vault, and those automatically generate and inject those secrets for us. And this is very much also aligned to the way the AIC is doing the secret management. Also, we've done a lot of standardization, and we've also addressed a lot of technical debt, right? So we annotations, image pool policies, the secrets, as I mentioned, the command definitions, so how we run our containers. We've also introduced a diagnostic mode, which is useful for debugging. We've also standardized our init containers, which we use for dependency checks, data migration, as well as seeding our databases. And we've also introduced a container security context, which you can also configure to limit the container privileges, right? And so basically, it only is allowed to do certain interactions with the underlying operating system that's running on the virtualized Kubernetes layer. We do have some breaking changes. That's why it's also a major release. I would say these breaking changes are not really breaking because you can work around them, but it's things you need to be cognizant of if you're deploying version 15, right? So once again, the backend dependencies have been externalized. This is really the biggest breaking change, right? If you were deploying Mojaloop with those backends that were included as part of the deployment, you will need to do some migration in terms of how you do that. If you go to the actual release notes, there is some notes there and things that can help you on how you can do that and how you should achieve that, as well as understanding what is the best practice from a deployment topology. Once again, just going back to the standardization. So we've refactored them for consistency. This means some of the configurations have moved to accommodate this. So you might have to relook at your values configurations and see how they've changed in V15 and just realign them. So be aware of that. The other thing that we had to do, and this is now for the supporting of the secrets that I mentioned previously, is some of our components didn't support environmental configurations for the passwords, and some of them had connection URLs, which are not well suited to basically injecting passwords through these environmental variables. And you need to do this in Kubernetes because that's how you inject passwords using secrets through that environmental variable mechanism. And so we've done some updates to Central Ledger, Bulk API, ML Testing Toolkit, and all service to support those things. So how you used to set those backend dependency host names, usernames, passwords, etc., you will need to also be aware of that and change those accordingly. There's also been some deprecation of some functionality. The ML Testing Toolkit backend had some dependencies on Keycloak and Connection Manager. Those are no longer needed. Those are actually really managed by the Connection Manager and the PM4ML. So that was actually removed as a result of that, which simplifies things and also helps us, reduces our maintenance. So just to, once again, Mojaloop V15 release is a release candidate. It's a work in progress. I'm hoping that we have a dev release by the end of this week. And that means that we're basically targeting for a final release, hopefully next week. You can access the current pull request here on this link. We have a working branch where we are busy doing this work in, and we also have release notes. I would say at the moment, the release candidate is it's pretty much final. There's very few changes that are going to happen at the moment, so it's fairly stable. If you did want to deploy it, so I'm talking to the people in the room like Tom Daly, as well as David Fry, who pretty much are going to have to take this and then make it work with Miniloop and make it with AIC. So this is really more information for you. But if you want to deploy it, you're welcome to. It's very simple. You need first Kubernetes installed. You need to clone the specific branch from the Helm repo. You need to switch to that project directory. You need to update the dependencies using the script. You need to install the backend. That's a prerequisite, right? And then you install Mojaloop itself. And then once that's all running and all successful, you can just run the Helm test command. There's some additional deployment guides here if you want some more information on how to set up Kubernetes. There's also some information here if you want to set up ingress access, if you want access to the testing toolkit, etc. If you want to call the APIs, you can go have a look at this link. Just to show you, if you have a deployment and you do a Helm list, right, which is just a listing of what's within a namespace in your Kubernetes, once again, you should see two things. You should see the backend, if you're just deploying the example backend, right, for convenience sake, and Mojaloop itself. You can see the version that we currently have for the backend, which is a 14.10, and we have the Mojaloop release itself, which is version 15. As well, you will also see here, there's a column called app version, and this has the individual versions for every service that's deployed within this deployment. So for example, we have the third-party SDK, which is version 15.10, testing toolkit, which is 16.00. So it's just for obviously convenience sake. If you do a Helm status, just so you guys are aware, if you run the Helm tests, you will actually see a summary of what tests have been executed. So for example, here you can see the setup for the SDK bulk, the setup for the third party, etc. And as well, lower down, you'll see there's a dot here. You'll see additional commands that you might find useful on, once again, how to find the status of a release, deployment, not a release, as well as how to test that release, get the logs, and maybe even filter out for specific test cases, etc. If you need more information about Helm and the CLI, you can go to this link here. So I'm just going to quickly demo some stuff here and show you some things like the release notes, etc., so you're aware of where to find them. So let me start with that. So the release notes, if you go to the Helm repo, right, github.com/mojaloop/helm, you can find the release notes, right, on the right side of the page over here. So this is all our published versions, right? You can access them here. And I'll just go through what are the sections in the release notes, right? So you can have an idea of it. The only caveat is because of version 15, the release notes are currently in another branch, the branch that I gave you, and they're currently in a change log file at the moment. We capture all our release notes in an ongoing change log history here, over here, for example, version 15. So that's the only caveat. Of course, this will be a release and it will be accessible the same way once it is released. So in the release notes, we just have a kind of a top level here so we know what major changes were made, etc., when, etc. We have a list of the new features. For every feature, we have a link to the pull requests that were used, or if not pull requests, to the commits that were used to actually make those or affect those changes. And we also generally have the associated story itself. So if you want to know more about why something was done, you can access the story. If you want to know exactly how it was done, you can access the actual, either the pull requests or the commits, right? And we have that for all our features, as well as the bug fixes, right? Then below that, we have our application versions. Here we show what is the current version that we have. And we also show what is the change. So for example, Central Ledger here was upgraded from version 16.3.1 to 17.0.1. And you can click on the compare link, and that will show you also what changes have occurred between those versions. We also have, once again, we've had this for a while. These are being deprecated, the finance portal UI, the portal backend, the settlement management, operating settlement. These are components that were used as the operation UIs. That's been replaced by the business ops framework, etc. That's been, so those are now finance portal UI version 3s. there are instructions in the README if you want to deploy that. And actually in the release notes down below, you'll also see there's links to that as well. We have the application release notes. So this is just directly to the specific versions of the components that we have. We also have the breaking changes. So as I said, for that backend dependency, there's some links here on how to deploy the backend dependencies, as well as a link here to the upgrade strategy guide, which talks about the deployment topologies, as well as how you could migrate between certain topologies as well. I've already gone through most of these, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. If there's any deprecations as well, that's already missed to the finance portal, etc. Also the note about you, if you want to deploy the latest version of the finance portal, etc., you can go to the business ops framework, the BOF Helm charts, etc. You can access them and deploy those if you want. As well as now we have our testing notes. And here we actually have a test dependency matrix where we include a version of all our components that we use for testing this release, right? So for example, Kubernetes, we are currently on version 1.24.8. This has also been deployed using Rancher 268, just as a note there, etc. And we go down to also the backend dependencies like MySQL, Kafka, Redis, MongoDB, etc. And importantly, we also have what testing toolkit test cases we've used to verify this. So at the moment, we also have a release candidate version of those testing toolkit test cases that we're using, and that's available currently through this link at the moment. And there's some notes about how you should be testing, about the simulators, etc. And if you want to test certain things like the third-party tests, the bulk API test, the third-party, and as well as the new bulk functionality tests, there's also links here in terms of what you should be doing as well. We also have a list of known issues here. I would say none of these issues are really high impact or anything like that. So if you have an issue, feel free to look at this and just see if it is one of the known issues and see how we're addressing it, etc. And we also have a list of contributors here that have also contributed to the to this release. This list is not necessarily fully updated. We're still in the process of finalizing it. Just to show you guys that the release is working, I have here in our Mojo 2 environment version 15 deployed. Just to show you, I can go to the demos. I can click on the mobile simulator.
Can I interrupt you for a minute? Yeah.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you maybe increase the size on your browser if you can? The font size. Thank you.
Is that better?
Thanks. Yeah.
Okay. So I have the mobile simulator here. On the far left, we have pink bank and we have the green bank. I think you've seen the simulator several times, so I'm not going to go into super detail with it. But basically, we're going to start with first the discovery phase. We're going to look up this MSISDN that we want to make a payment to. We've resolved that by using the get parties request, and we can see obviously the workflow here between the Mojaloop switch, the Oracle lookup, the green bank, and the callbacks coming back. We have now the participants, the party information for the actual recipient, right? We have an amount we want to enter. I'm just going to select USD, for example. I'm going to do a get quote. And we're similarly going to get that. We're going to get the fees associated with that. And then I can proceed and do the actual payments, right? So the transfer itself, and we can see that transfer is done. And the payments were sent and received. And just to also show you from a hub console perspective, I should have showed you the position. The position was 0 before I started. Since I sent 100, you can see what the payer and the payee look like, what their positions are, as well as the settlement accounts. And I'm basically just going to settle that to show that the positions are going to go to 0, and those money are going to then reflect in the settlement accounts. Give it a second. And should we have it up and running in a moment? Here we go, and we should see 0, 0, and that basically they've been moved over to each of these sites to reflect those changes, and the positions are now back to 0. Just to also show you as well, if I just quickly go here, I don't want to spend too much time and I don't want to have too much technical. So some of those changes we made to standardize our actual values configurations, I'm just going to show you the Helm chart for the account lookup service just to show you as an example. Here we go. So there's been changes here. So you'll see the image, the commands have been moved out to be consistent, as well as
Can
the
you make
policy.
it bigger, please?
Yes, can you hear me?
Can you make it bigger, please? The size.
It's pretty big. Is that better?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I already did make it bigger. All right, this is very hard for me to see. But okay, so we have the image. So we've refactored that. We've moved the commands out to be more consistent. We've also added the diagnostic mode, which is helpful for debugging. You can enable this, and it enables things, for example, the debug ports, etc., and also exposes the internal ports for the debugging. We've also standardized on the by adding a container security. So now you can set the actual run level and the authorization in terms of what the user can do in that container and manage in terms of how they interact with the underlying operating system. We've also standardized on the way we do configurations. And we've done that also for a couple of reasons, because we mentioned that we did the secret stuff. So for example, we have passwords here, where by default, all passwords are empty. And you can see below, we can also stipulate the secret. So if I stipulate a secret like this, it will override whatever I put in the password, right? Of course, you need the secret already configured before you do deployment. We also have a standardization of the init containers. Previously, all the charts did init containers in a different way. We now have a standard way of doing it, and it's consistent. And we're using the same init containers and the same definitions. So if we need an init container to wait for a MySQL dependency, it's the same one everywhere throughout our Helm chart repos. We've also standardizing the services to have internal ports, as well as some annotations, as well as setting the load balancers, resources, etc. Yeah, so that's basically the standardization there. What I'm also going to do is also show you the announcements, right? So I'm just going to run a test here as well. I'm just going to get a list here of let me just get rid of this thing on the left, make this bigger. Right, so this is currently my environment I have. I just want to quickly do a Helm status Moja 2. And I just want to show you how we run Helm tests using the CLI and how that currently sends a report to the announcements channel. So this is something we do in the open source when we're testing our releases. We have Moja 2, which is like a staging environment, and we have a Moja 1, which is like our production environment. I'm just going to run the golden path test. You're going to see here we have a couple of tests. We have a standard setup. We have a golden path. We have a bulk test. We have a setup for the SDK bulk tests. We have the actual validation for the SDK bulks. We have a setup for third-party tests, and we have a setup, and we have the validation for third-party tests. I'm just going to run one of these tests. So I'm just going to do a filter, and I'm just going to say, I just want to run that one test. While that's happening, it should take 2 minutes or so. I want to show you what the announcements look like. So on the Mojaloop Slack org, there's an announcements channel here. And here you're going to see lots of things. You're going to see when we make releases of individual components. So for example, here you can see Central Ledger. There was a release of Central Ledger. There was a GitHub release. You can click here and see the release notes. That resulted in a NPM, a library being published. You can access that here, as well as a Docker container that was also published, and you can access that here, right? Below that, when we run any tests in our Moja 1 and Moja 2 environments, we even have as well scheduled tests that run on a nightly, specifically for the Moja 1 environment. You will see those announcements here where we actually have the actual report published. So for example, here's the provisioning collection, whether there were any failures, etc. And we also have a link to the report itself. And those tests that you saw that I showed you on the command line, you'll see match here as well. So we have the GP tests, we have the bulk tests, we have the third-party provisioning collection, we have the third-party validation tests, we have the SDK provisioning collection, we have the SDK bulk tests, and hopefully in 1 or 2 minutes, we should see now the GP test that I just executed also appear here. And of course, we can access this report by just clicking this link. Anyone should be able to have access to this.
We are at time, so we may not be able to wait for the run to finish. So, yeah.
Okay. Then the last thing I just want to show is we have a new functionality that was introduced 14.1.1 is the reports tab on the testing toolkit. So we can now have the ability to save our tests over here, and we can now access the history of them and download them. Cool. Thank you very much.
David, are you ready?
I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Miguel.
Yep, let me share my screen. Can you see, Sam?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I know we're probably running out of time. So I'm just going to quickly summarize the IAC work. And part of that is a recap from the mid-PI review. So we have the Mojaloop release for 14.1. And in a nutshell, what we did is we took a cloud agnostic version that had been worked on and we merged it with some new code that was supporting the 14.1 changes. And we have a summary here. I'm not going to go into all the detail about it. One thing that I will mention because of the focus of Miguel on the separation of the stateful resources from the Mojaloop chart is that's something that the IAC has been doing since version 13 of Mojaloop. The IAC has specific code to deal with creating stateful resources out of band from the Mojaloop release. And I want to just quickly share some of that. That was probably the first thing you saw when I shared my screen. In the IAC, we have a workbench config file. And I'm showing you the version for 14.1. And as you can see, there are multiple environment variables that get set. Most of them have to do with the versions of different components that are being installed. Here, for example, you can see the Mojaloop version is 14.1.0. And further down the list, you will see some payment manager configurations that are used. Keep going down, and you'll see a section called stateful resources. Now, this section here will show all the different databases that we're creating in order to support not only the Mojaloop components, but also WSO2, anything that needs a backend in order to function. We have pulled those out into configuration elements within this JSON file that not only configure how you build it locally, so there's actually some structure in here. The first part of the structure has to do with how we reference this service in a logical fashion in Kubernetes. And the second part has to do with if you're going to create it locally, here are the details that you use in order to actually deploy it into Kubernetes. And that would include the Helm chart version, where the values are going to be pulled from the template file, etc. So no more detail on this, but I just wanted to mention that because there was a comment from FitzelWorks, I believe, about creating external services or managed database services and then using those managed database services within a IAC deployment. The preferred way to do that would be to reference them using these logical service names and external service. So anyway, I won't talk any more about that because we're limited on time. So I am going to go back to the slide deck. There was work done by VJ on support for bulk. So I was not involved in this release, but I just wanted to point out that the latest release is the release that VJ did. It's the 3.1.0 release, and he's enabled SDK bulk support for payment managers. So that allows for a standardized IAC deployment of a switch and related payment managers to be able to be testing SDK bulk functionality. So you can see here those release notes from that 3.1.0 release. And finally, I wanted to talk briefly about some of the work that's upcoming to take the work that we already have for stateful resource separation in V14 Mojaloop, the IAC that supports V14, and adapt that for the secret K8 secret-based credential management that is being finalized within the V15 effort. So there's some items here. I'm not going to get into too much detail, but to say that we are going to be working on a method for creating random passwords for these different resources and not storing them anywhere except for in HashiCorp Vault, and then using an operator in order to propagate those values into secrets, Kubernetes secrets, in multiple namespaces so that those can be used both by the stateful resource Helm chart as well as the Mojaloop Helm chart for reference purposes when it needs those in its values for various components. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to hand it back over to you, Sam.
Thank you, David. Great stuff.
Stop
If you
sharing
can
my
stop
screen.
sharing, I'll just take a few seconds and pass it on to Simeon. Just one more. David, can you stop sharing?
Yeah, I'm trying.
Okay, that's fine. Actually, can you go to next slide? It's fine. I'll just do a summary and pass it in just 20 seconds. Next one, please. Thank you. So V15, to summarize, for the audience, please, you're not allowed to zone out. We have more of these technical sessions. I'll just summarize. So what do we have in V15? Thank you so much for the detail, Miguel, David, and there's also a team behind this and contributors who are doing this. We have V15, which is more secure. We wanted to do this for a long time. I know Miller commented like 2.5 years ago about not having any clear text passwords in our configuration files and trying to force the users to use security best practices. So it's now a reality. So it's more secure. It's maintainable because we separated out the external dependencies and we have bulk ready for adoption out of the box. So those are the main three things, and we went to detail and looked at that. Thanks for the demonstrations and all the details. I'm sure we'll have more conversations on that. Tomorrow on the roadmap day, we'll talk about more on what's coming, but there are some candidates that are listed for community to prioritize along with the product council. Thank you very much. Thanks, Simeon. Sorry.